Hamas terrorists have admitted they used civilians as human shields against Israeli forces in Gaza. The confessions were revealed just as Israel is entering a new phase in the war against Hamas.
That phase is good news for Israeli citizens who've been evacuated from the combat zone. Many of them are soon going to get to go home. Julie Stahl brings us the story from Jerusalem.
The Israel Defense Forces announced that they're releasing 5 brigades from combat in the Gaza Strip as the military is gaining more control on the ground. However, the IDF says the war against Hamas will likely continue throughout the rest of the year. And as the IDF lowers the intensity of the fighting in northern Gaza, Israelis in 6 communities between about 2.5 to 4 miles from the Gaza Strip will be allowed to return to their homes after being evacuated following the Hamas massacre on October 7th.
In accordance with the recommendations given by the IDF and the defense establishment, we will soon be able to return communities home in areas within a range of 4 to 7 kilometers north of the Gaza Strip to their homes.
And while Israel's military pursues Hamas, the country's High Court of Justice struck down the law passed by the Knesset to remove some of the Supreme Court's power. The measure would forbid justices to negate a law because they don't find it reasonable, but the High Court voted 8-7 against the law, which fueled months of anti-government protests before the war. But the battle over the High Court's power may not be over, although that fight may not continue until after the Hamas war is over. Meanwhile, the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier is returning home after an extended deployment. The Ford was sent to the Mediterranean to be within striking distance of Israel after the October 7th Hamas massacre. And Israeli fighter jets struck terrorist infrastructure in Lebanon on Monday and Tuesday, where Iranian-backed Hezbollah terrorists were operating. Back in Gaza, the Israeli military kept up its attacks on Hamas and revealed what it learned about how the terrorists hide among civilians.
During the operation in Khan Yunis, our forces identified suspects who were hiding among women and children. During interrogation, it was revealed that they were terrorists, some of whom participated in the terrorist attack on October 7th. Whether the terrorists are hiding in tunnels, hospitals, or by civilians, we will reach them.
The IDF also released footage of the interrogation of 2 Gazans who gave details of how Hamas used civilians against Israeli forces. An Islamic Jihad member told how Hamas stopped Gazans from evacuating and instead transferred them to the Shifa hospital. The terrorists stayed underground there until they realized the IDF was coming, and then they mingled among the civilians. A Hamas member told a story about a family who didn't want a Hamas operative to plant a bomb by his apartment because his children were inside. The terrorist told him he would put it between the father and his wife instead. And when the man kept arguing, the Hamas member shot him in the leg. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Please remember that Hamas is the government of Gaza. Yes, they are a terrorist group. They've been identified as a terrorist group for years. But they're still the government. And when you have that kind of government that says we're going to hide behind civilians, we're going to put military installations in hospitals, in mosques, in churches, in public places, we're going to hide, use the civilians as shields. All of that is a war crime under international law. Let us please keep that in mind as Israel continues this horrible war. From the beginning of it, October 7th, I never thought I'd see anything like that in my lifetime, but here it is. Hamas has to go. And while it goes, please remember the remaining hostages that they're keeping. All the calls for ceasefires, all the calls for withdrawals, please do not ever ignore Israeli citizens are still in captivity.